the Western public were told that we were bombing in the name of humanity, that we had to stop genocide. But after the Serb army pulled out of Kosovo and the forensic teams were the first to rush in, there have been very few bodies found. We'll never know how many people were killed, but the figures that NATO announced were highly exaggerated.
Instead of 100,000 dead or missing, after more than a year of digging later, the War Crimes Tribunal found 2,108 bodies, which included combatants and Serbs as well as Kosovar Albanians. Moreover, the total missing, according to the International Committee of the Red Cross, is 3,368, a number which includes all ethnic groups in Kosovo. NATO's intervention ended in June with Kosovo under nominal control of the UN, terms that the Serbs had been willing to give them before the brutal bombing campaign began.
The United States was looking to punish Yugoslavia, was looking, I believe, to complete the process of wresting Kosovo away. And in the final essence, 79 days later, they weren't quite able to achieve that objective because Yugoslavia put up too much resistance and there was enough diplomatic support for Yugoslavia among the Russians and Chinese that so far they have been able to obstruct the formal secession of Kosovo from Yugoslavia.
Almost a year after the bombing, Newsweek magazine obtained a secret report the U.S. Department of Defense had commissioned, which showed that the number of Yugoslav tanks and artillery destroyed by NATO was only a tiny fraction of the stated claims. Instead of 120 tanks destroyed, there were only 14. Instead of 450 artillery pieces destroyed, there were only 20. Newsweek reporters John Barry and Evan Thomas stated that NATO had been, quote, terror bombing civilians. Air power, they noted, was effective in the Kosovo War not against military targets, but against civilian ones. When the war concluded, Serbian units were compelled to leave Kosovo, but the Pentagon permitted armed units of the KLA to enter. There is little doubt that the Pentagon knew that this decision would enable the KLA to attack Serbs and Kosovo's other ethnic minorities. Pentagon briefers sought to prepare public opinion for new atrocities ahead.
I don't think that Kosovo is going to be a very happy place for Serbs when NATO comes in. I don't think Serbs will want to stay there.
I mean, I fled with Serbian refugees out of Pristina, so I know the terror that they felt. I was on a bus that ran the gauntlet of jeering Albanians. There was 700 or 800 of them that stoned the bus in full view of the British troops, who made no attempt to intervene whatsoever.
Under pressure from NATO, the UN administrator for Kosovo, Bernard Kouchner, appointed General Agim Ceku, who served as chief of staff of the KLA, to be head of the Kosovo Protection Corps. Ceku had been identified by senior Canadian military officials as a war criminal for his role in massacres in Croatia.
The KLA have stated their intention. They want an ethnically pure Albanian Kosovo, and if they're in charge of the security force, there's no question that there's going to be reprisals. There is reprisals, and that the head of this organization has proven himself to be a mass murderer.
What we see as the outcome is the KLA has managed to chase tens of thousands of gypsies out. The last Jews in Kosovo left very quickly. The Croatians have left, they being Catholic. Slavic Muslims and Turks are being chased out. And what it really is anybody who speaks Serb is either murdered or chased out. And everybody now understands this. The UN High Commissioner for Refugees reported that in January alone, 1,000 Turks and Gorani Muslims had to leave their homes because of KLA terrorism. And the United States has presided over the erection of the most intolerant society in Europe.
The Albanian refugees had returned with a NATO escort following the war, but nearly a year later, 250,000 of Kosovo's minority population had fled, including 2/3 of Kosovo's Serb population. Despite the attacks on minorities, NATO officials, including NATO Commander Wesley Clark, continued to work closely with Hashim Thaçi and Agim Ceku.
And I think there's no question that the Serbs, the Slav Muslims, the Gypsies have been cleansed out of Kosovo, and this has taken place despite the fact that there are 40,000 NATO troops in Kosovo.
In an attempt to remove any reminder of the Serbian presence in Kosovo since 700 AD, the KLA has destroyed or damaged 70 churches and monasteries. In 1 year of occupation by NATO, more religious artifacts were destroyed than under 600 years of Turkish occupation.
History is going to have to analyze very carefully the decisions that were made in leading us to that, what I consider to be an immoral, illegal, unconstitutional, ineffective, incomprehensible, indefensible policy.
By using force and taking sides in an ethnic conflict, NATO had drawn the wrong lessons from earlier conflicts in Bosnia and Croatia.
If the Europeans and the Americans et al., the United Nations, had not intervened in Yugoslavia, there would have been far fewer people killed, there would have been far less ethnic cleansing, there would have been some extremely unhappy and dissatisfied people who felt that they had been done out of their country or their livelihood or whatever it might be. But there were going to be a very large number of dissatisfied and unhappy people at the end of all this. And perhaps the moral of it all is that you should think very carefully before you intervene in a civil war.
I think it's very important for the United States to recognize that in ethnic and nationalist conflicts that you must, if you want to end wars and stop violence, you must be impartial. Because then you do not feed, by taking one side, you do not feed the nationalist dynamic and you do not lead to peace.
I think there's no question that Kosovo was an unnecessary war. It was an attempt to bomb Yugoslavia into submission. And I think that's what should be of concern to all people of the world these days, that we have the United States as a very powerful military force that no longer sees diplomacy and negotiation as worth their while.
By the late 1980s, ethnic unrest in Kosovo had already set the stage for the breakup of Yugoslavia. For Serbs who first inhabited the area in the 7th century AD, Kosovo was the cradle of their civilization, their Jerusalem, and home to their most revered monasteries.
A bit of history, unfortunately, is required here. The Albanians pushed Serbs out in the 19th century. The Serbs started pushing Albanians out around 1904. The Albanians surged back in World War II under Italian protection and pushed Serbs out.
When the war ended, however, Marshal Tito decided to keep the Serbian refugees from returning to their homes in Kosovo. As a result, Serbs lost their majority in the province.
Tito is very guilty of that particular drama of Kosovo. He made it much harder to solve, in fact, almost impossible.
To keep a restive Albanian population within the Yugoslav Federation, Tito's 1974 constitution gave Kosovo autonomy as a province of Serbia. However, the autonomy was badly abused by Tito's Albanian communist cadres, who permitted a campaign of violence to drive out the remaining Serbian population.
Life was made extremely difficult for the Serb minority, and it was here that the Kosovos began to push to have a pure, all Albanian, meaning racially pure, Kosovo in the areas where there were very few Serbs anyhow. They were pushing them out. And the Serbs used the word that it was ethnic cleansing, and that's what it was.
Homes of Serbs were appropriated by Albanians. Orthodox Christian cemeteries and monasteries were desecrated. By the late 1980s, the Serbian population of Kosovo had gone from 50% at the start of World War II to just 10%.